Hi, Jennifer. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Krista. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me on the show today.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here today. So, my first question is always the same. I like to sort of kick back and relax and let my guests do the work on who they are and what they do. So, can you give our listening audience just a quick intro of who you are and what you do, all things Jennifer?
Absolutely. Thank you for providing a platform so I can share with your listeners all about what I do. So, I am Jennifer Mtichell, and I'm a quantum healing hypnosis practitioner. And I'm going to dive in and explain all about what that is. I'd like to start off by saying that in 2017, like, everything changed for me, Krista. Like, my whole life changed over one YouTube video. I was feeling really unfulfilled in my work at the time. Looking back now, I think I might have even been depressed. I used to spend my entire Sunday in bed crying, and I didn't want to get up because I knew I had to go to work the next day, and I would spend the next 5 days absolutely miserable. And one day I was looking on YouTube, and I came across a video from Dolores Cannon. So I don't know if you've heard of her, if your listeners are familiar with her, but I was just in awe. It sparked something inside of me that hadn't really been sparked in a long time. Dolores Cannon was talking about ancient Atlantis and how through hypnosis and the subconscious minds of her clients that she had uncovered ancient civilizations in Atlantis, Lemuria. She was also talking about how her clients under quantum hypnosis were recalling lives on other planets, and they were self-healing their bodies, and the bones would crack under sessions through the healing. And I was just in awe. I was like, what is this? Who is this woman? Because if anyone knows Dolores Cannon, she was this little old lady. She looked like she should be baking cookies for her grandkids or knitting a blanket. But no, she was talking about this mind-bending, just brain candy. And I was so intrigued. So I went down this Dolores Cannon rabbit hole, reading her books and watching all the videos. And I knew that I had to go get a session. And so back in 2017, I really couldn't find a lot of practitioners here in my area. I'm based out of Las Vegas. So I found somebody in LA, and I flew out there and I had a session. And I didn't even realize I was packing a lot of trauma. A lot of trauma is released in these sessions from childhood. I grew up with two parents who were addicted to substance abuse, and my mom who struggled with schizophrenia. And so I was carrying a lot inside of me that I didn't even realize at the time. And all of that was released in my session. We got down to the root cause of a lot of body aches and pains. I experienced 3 past life regressions in my session. And at the end of the session, my subconscious higher self came forward to give me advice for my life. And it said, "You're going to be a practitioner." And I was like, what? Okay, I didn't expect that to come through. And it also told me that it wasn't time yet, and I still had some work I needed to do. So I went back to my work and feeling unfulfilled in my job, and I actually climbed even further up the corporate ladder into senior executive role at a bank. And when the pandemic started, that's where I was working, and it was getting really bad. I was actually struggling a lot at work. I was experiencing some heavy workplace bullying. It's crazy to think that in the adult world that happens, but I was being really bullied a lot by other executives. And I didn't want to go into work ever. And one morning I was sitting out front, and I was actually pouring vodka in my coffee. It had come to that, and that's not even who I am, and not much of a drinker, but I needed that just to get through the day and walk through the door. And I heard my subconscious say, "It's time." And I knew right away exactly what that meant, because I was waiting. My session was still in the back of my mind, and I knew I wasn't living my life purpose. And so I actually went in that day and put my notice in. I had been thinking about it for a long time, and I decided to take the plunge into this line of work that's so incredible and amazing. And so now it's been 3 years. I've been a full-time practitioner helping people discover their life path, heal from trauma, and relive, their past life experiences.
Wow, thank you so much for all of that detail. I can't wait to unpack some of your experiences with your own regression. I have that as one of the questions, so I'm excited to talk to you about that as well. I have two comments here. The first one is about Dolores Cannon, who is so goddamn adorable.
Yes.
You would think she would be like a little grandma, like cooking or like like making you Sunday dinner, and she's
Yeah.
just so, like you wouldn't. There's nothing really like what I would say, extraordinary. I guess that's kind of a weird thing to
Hmm.
say, but like she seemed like an everyday person.
Yeah.
But what just filled with like a deep, profound knowing and understanding of things that we are still struggling to measure and quantify and
Hmm.
collect as evidence for people who are still skeptical. So I love that that you thought that about her too, because every time I watch her videos or shorts on YouTube, I just think she's so adorable. I just like want to like sit down in a living room and talk to her.
I know. I wish we could. I mean, she was really a spiritual pioneer for 45
She
years.
was.
He, she was doing this work and she was expanding like the boundaries during a time when nobody else was doing it. I mean, could you imagine being in the 1950s and being a past life regressionist? She definitely led the way for many of us.
Yeah, she was really cool. My second question is always the same for everyone as well. The inception of this podcast started after I left my religion of origin and wanting to seek a community that understood me in a different way through spirituality. And as I've come to learn over these past like 5, 6 years and 9 seasons of podcasting, I'm just so interested now in everybody's origin story and how we're all evolving and changing. And it's really fascinating to me to hear people's beginning stories and then see where they shook out. Almost, I would say 99% of people that come to the show have left whatever they were raised in or what they didn't know and then found themselves obviously on the spiritual path. And it's
Yeah.
so interesting. So for you, what was that experience like growing up, and then where did you land as an adult?
Yeah. Well, I will say I didn't have a traditional upbringing. I actually didn't really have a lot of religion in my life from a young age. Let me back up and talk a little bit about trauma because I believe that trauma cracks us wide open spiritually. And so from a very young age, I was aware, even I would say as early as 6, 7, maybe even younger, that I had a different life purpose on this planet. I always had that sense of knowing that I was meant for more and that I was here for a reason outside of like the typical Monday 9 to 5 societal, like get up,
Norms.
go to work. And so, both of my parents from a young age, I struggled with substance abuse. And when I was age 4, I'll just share a story because I believe, honestly, this is really what kind of cracked me open spiritually from a young age. One night, I was in the apartment with my mother. She was a single mom at the time. My dad was off doing who knows what. And I remember I wanted to play. I remember like running around like a little kid. Like I wanted to play a game or something. And I couldn't find my mom. And so I was looking. And the bathroom door was closed. And so I remember turning the handle so clearly. Sometimes these memories, come through. And the bathroom was all steamy. And I went in, to the bathroom. I was like, Mom, I want to play. And she was in the tub. And I remember, like, the steam rising. And I shook her. And I said, Mom. And she didn't respond. And I was scared. I was like, Mom, wake up. And she didn't wake up. So I went downstairs because we lived in an apartment upstairs. I went downstairs and I went to the neighbors that lived directly underneath us, and I knocked on the door and I said, my mom won't wake up. And I was crying and I was really scared. And then the couple brought me in and the gentleman went upstairs. And next thing I remember was the EMTs being there and my mom coming down the stairs on a stretcher. And I knew even then that something was wrong, and I knew what it was. I always had like again a sense of knowing. I knew my mom struggled with taking pills, those Valiums, and she had the oxygen mask on, so I felt relieved knowing that she was going to be okay. And then the ambulance said that the mom she'd overdosed and that she'd taken too many pills. And that moment was really defining for me in my childhood because again, like I just felt like I was so raw and vulnerable in that moment that it cracked me open spiritually. So from then on, I just felt different from everybody else in my family. I couldn't relate with people. And throughout my childhood, my mom, she struggled with schizophrenia. And I didn't understand it at a young age. She was a single mom. And so I couldn't figure out why my mom's reality was so different than mine. Like she didn't understand like how to function from day to day, and then so struggling with that. So growing up was very different for me. I didn't have a traditional upbringing with two parents or any type of like, I would say, religion, so to speak. And as I got older and stumbled across, Dolores, that is what sparked the knowing inside of me. I was like, wait, I already know this stuff. Like, it was interesting. Like, that's why I said I felt something that was sparked inside of me that hadn't been sparked in a long time, but I always kind of knew that there was more. So that's what led me down my path. And yeah, that's kind of a little bit about my origin story.
Yeah, that's really interesting and very scary too. And did you remember that later on in life, that memory, or did you have it always with you?
It's interesting. This is a real interesting question. Nobody's asked me that before. And it was there, but it was just below the surface. There's a lot of memories that are there. And, I do also want to say that things happened to me. Like, I had a really difficult childhood. A lot of people do. I work with processing trauma. It prepared me to help others. And so I'm actually very thankful for everything that I lived through. It's what's made me resilient and strong. It's the foundation of who I am. Everything that I've gone through in my past and have overcome has made it to where I can help others process the traumas and live through things as well and release that from their body, because I've done the work, I've been through it, and I can connect with people. And so it's also important for anyone maybe listening to this, Krista, who's had, traumas in the past, to really work at turning it into a source of strength so that we don't constantly live in the past. Living in the past can be really dangerous because you can it really can. You go over these scenarios and situations and you play them over and over and over in your mind and in your head, and you torment yourself, and it really robs you of the present, and it can really, prevent you from moving forward and, achieving what you're meant here to achieve here in this life.
Yeah, I'm giggling because I literally just did a lesson on that this week about living in the past and how, we often think about us as humans. I think it's very natural for us to want to avoid pain. So we do that in various ways. And it's not just like physical pain, it's trauma that we're talking about here, psychological trauma, all of the things. And we just have this idea that avoiding it for some reason is going to make it easier, but then it's always harder. And then when we continue to tell those sort of shameful stories about our past over and over, it gets us really stuck. And you're right, like, we all go through something. None of us, I don't know anyone, I've never met anyone who's had a perfect life, and if they had, there's trauma there probably too. And yeah, I think to your point, and what we want to do here on the podcast is always encourage alchemy in our lived experiences, because it does help you build strength and resilience, and it helps you settle in yourself in a way you can't find anywhere else. I'm curious then, did you start doing QHTT with a practitioner, and what else did you discover about yourself on that journey before we sort of get into the questions and the inverse of how you're helping people, since we're already in this line of communication? I want to stay on this track.
Absolutely. So it's actually QHHT, so it's Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. It's a little bit of a mouthful, so I just tend to tell people Quantum Healing Hypnosis, so just shorten it. There's two modalities. I would like to actually define both. So originally, Dolores Cannon is credited with coming up with the modality of QHHT, being able to make that deep, deep connection under hypnosis. It's not anything like a traditional hypnosis experience. We go very deep and we pull forward the higher self, and the higher self verbally speaks to us under the session, and everything's recorded. There's also the online version, which is called BQH, and that was created by Dolores Cannon's longtime assistant. And it is formatted in a little bit of a different manner. It applies the tools and techniques and the basic principles that Dolores Cannon taught, but it also helps us to expand to help clients online in a different format than in person. When I had my session, it was really interesting, Krista, because the subconscious mind, also known as the higher self, will kind of toggle between both those terms, but they are one and the same. it knows what we need. It's always here to protect us. It's our partner in this life.
Mm-hmm.
It's also referred to as intuition. That is your higher self. Your intuition is. Uh, it knows what the client needs and knew what I needed when I went for the session. And so when I went into my past life regression, first and foremost, I had a beautiful experience where I regressed to a man and I lived, I believe it was in Greece. We don't ask a lot of really analytical questions like where are you, like location wise, because it could trigger the part of the mind that will kick you out of hypnosis. But through creative fact finding, my practitioner uncovered, I believe I was in Greece. And I was married to a lady named Amelia. I can still see her face. It's really interesting. Once these memories are unearthed, you're there. And she would wear like a red flower in her hair, and she had like a side bun, and she was very beautiful. And we had 2 children. We had a son and a daughter. So I lived through that experience, and my higher self wanted to show me that one time I was part of a family like that was, a beautiful family unit, and different than like what I had experienced growing up. And so it specifically chose that life for me to recall and remember, knowing that would bring me comfort, and knowing like, hey, even though I didn't have that experience, in this lifetime, I was once part of a family unit, and I was the father. I have lived a life where I had a beautiful family, normal, stable environment. I also recall the lifetime where I was a cardiologist and my name was Dickie.
Okay.
I was called Dickie for short, and I was like a cardiologist, and I went through like the whole life experience there. It was very interesting.
Wow.
And then I even bounced to a lifetime where I was a monk, and I wanted to get out of there. I didn't like being a monk. I was being bullied by the other monks, and I was living this life that my parents had chose for me. They wanted me to be a monk, and they forced me into it. And that was very applicable to where I was at in my current situation. Again, the higher self will make those connections for you. And so when my practitioner said, why did you show her this experience as a monk where she was so miserable? I spent most of my days talking to hummingbirds in the garden.
Oh.
And I was very sad. And I said, because she is living her life now based on what other people want her to do. And she has already done that. And she needs to know that she doesn't have to do it again. So again, it made that connection for me, showing like, hey, I'd already lived the life that my parents wanted me to live, and I was miserable. And now I was living a life that, society, or I was getting pressure from people in my family to like keep going, working your corporate job and climbing the ladder. But I didn't really want to do that. So that came forward in my lifetimes, and lots of healing as well. When we connect with the subconscious, the mind will scan the body looking for healing opportunities. So a lot of trauma was released from my body during my first session that I had been burying, experiences and memories. And sometimes our higher self, subconscious, will keep those memories, to your point earlier, just below the surface, because it's trying to protect you. And sometimes it will come forward when it's time, when it knows that you can handle it and that you're ready to heal from it and release it.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting how, like, even if you've never heard these terms, even if you're just dipping your toe into spirituality and sort of understanding and making these, I would say, broad connections, I think we always have this knowing of the past, and sometimes we bump up against it, and it's so interesting. Like, you're just like, things feel familiar, people feel familiar, the circumstances that you are, but you can't quite even touch or feel it or taste it, or it's like it's so close yet it's so far away. It's so fascinating to me when people do this work and they find out all of these deep connections. And for you, since we're talking about the trauma piece, which is the question I had, what can we tell the audience about what in tangible terms is getting released with this trauma work? And does it happen every session? Is it different for every person? Give us kind of like a high level of what happens to the trauma and how you're alleviating that in the hypnosis as well.
Absolutely. Every session is different. I will start with that, because everybody's needs are different based on where they're at in their current life. And I also want to preface that as a practitioner, I'm not really doing a lot other than connecting you, the client, to your higher self. this is why I love this work so much, is that it's self-healing. It is you and your subconscious coming forward to do the work. I'm just on the sidelines making the connection. I'm asking the questions. I'm doing the recording. So I do want to preface with that. I'd like to actually share a story, if that is okay, about a client who came to me, and it was an amazing healing experience. There's so many stories I could share, but this one always just kind of sticks out, and it's a beautiful experience. I had a young lady come to me, we'll call her Candy. Candy came to me, and before we dive deep into hypnosis, the most important part of the session actually is what I call is like spiritual counseling, is that you talk with me. I provide a very safe place. There's really nothing you could say or tell me that I haven't already heard or maybe even experienced something similar myself.
Yeah.
And so it's really important when you come for a session that you come ready, raw, and open to share. Because if you can't share with me, your subconscious or the heck isn't going to come out under hypnosis and talk to me. So it's really important that you can talk with me prior. So Candy was telling me about how she had this really deep sadness inside her, and she doesn't understand it. She had a beautiful life growing up, 2 parents. Like she said, my childhood was perfect, but I'm sad and I cry all the time and I just feel so alone and I don't know why. And we also uncovered that she was experiencing some health problems in the pre-session. She said that she was having a really bad pain in the upper left quadrant of her stomach. She'd gone for tests with doctors. She had changed her diet. She had tried Reiki, like all of these things. She didn't know what the stomach pain was, and doctors couldn't find anything. So when we get under hypnosis, the session begins. She regressed back to her past life, and my clients, they're in the quantum, and I'll explain that a little bit later, but to them it's happening in the here and now when they're in a session. So she starts to whisper, and I said, why are we whispering? And she says, because he might hear me. And I was like, well, who's going to hear you? And she says, my daddy. And I said, okay. I was like, well, you can talk to me, this is a safe place. And so she is a little girl, and I could tell by how she was talking that she was had regressed to a younger age. She said, I'm listening in on my dad's conversation, and if I get caught, I'm going to be in trouble. And I said, well, what is your dad saying? She says, he's on the phone, and he's trying to get this person to take me because my mommy just died, and he doesn't want me. And right away, as a practitioner, sitting on the side and hearing this, I knew, okay, bam, here's the sadness you're experiencing, that we were talking about before we regressed.
Yeah.
That sense of sadness. And I said, okay. And then so she starts to cry, and I'm like, it's okay, it's all right. This is a safe place. Let's just move forward from this scene. So we drift and we float forward into another scene during a lifetime. And what comes forward during this scene is she's scared. She's like, I'm scared. And then it's very interesting because, the body again is going through this. So her body starts to kind of move different, and the breathing changes. I'm like, it's all right. We don't need to be scared. Again, this is a safe place. Just talk to me like you're watching a movie. She's like, there's so many people, and I just feel so small. And I was like, well, where are you? She's like, I'm at a parade. And so she starts to describe what seems, dating it, I would probably say maybe 1950s. And it sounded like a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, a big, huge parade. And she tells me, my daddy brought me here to leave me because he didn't want me, and I cannot find him. So her dad had abandoned her in this parade, and she was very scared, and she's crying. And really, again, this is the trauma that's being released, like deep in their body. Like you can see them processing and moving, and just let it out. Just let it out, Candy. Let it out. So she's sobbing and she's crying, and then we move forward again. And we always go through, Krista, the death experience. And I've actually learned that death is nothing to be afraid of. It's a beautiful, peaceful transition. And I've gone through hundreds of death experiences with many clients. And so we arrive at the last day in this lifetime that we're witnessing. And I do ask, typically, again, I don't ask analytical questions, but I was trying to make a connection. I said, how old are you? 27, she says. And her voice had changed from that young little girl in the first scene to now her voice is different. And I said, well, tell me, about what you're doing. And so she had proceeded to tell me that she'd lived her life on the streets and had fallen into being a sex worker, and she was addicted to drugs in this life because she was abandoned and she didn't have a way to survive. And so she on the last day of her life was in an alleyway, and she had, I don't know if I can't recall if she had just finished, working, or if she was doing some sort of an exchange for drugs. Either way, she was stabbed. She was stabbed in the upper left side of her stomach, right where she had been complaining that pain was. And she was looking at her hands, and her hands were covered in blood. And she was breathing heavily. And I said, it's okay. We don't need to experience any discomfort, or there's no pain in this place. Just talk me and walk me through it. So she passed to the other side. When we were on the other side, I asked the subconscious, well, why did you show us this lifetime? This is because, we needed to release the trauma that she had been carrying. She wasn't letting go of these experiences, which I had already made that connection myself as a practitioner. And I said, can we cut the cords? Are there cords that we need to cut? And he said, yes. And so, the body again starts to move, and we do like a cord cutting ceremony, releasing, the emotion and the pain that was linked to that lifetime. And also I asked if it can heal any discomfort that was experiencing in the stomach where she had been stabbed. And it said, yes, she won't experience that pain anymore. And ironically enough, when she came to me in this lifetime, she was 27. The same age that she was in that life when she had been stabbed. And so that's just one example of so many stories I can tell. But yes, for everyone it's different based off of your soul's journey and your soul's experience. And so your subconscious knows what it needs to show you to release and to heal at that present time that you are.
That was a very fascinating experience that girl had. But I think my first initial question is, was that the life that she was living now, was it right behind that last one, or were there many lives in between that one and that she had currently? Do you know?
That's a good question, and it's something that I could ask as a practitioner if that was on her list of questions. As a practitioner, it's important that we don't hijack. We don't hijack, the session and start asking something.
Of course,
the client didn't bring me on the list.
Yeah.
I will tell you this, that many of us have tasks. I don't know if I want to say job, but we there's things that we do in between the here and now. For instance,
I've heard that before.
Yeah, and I'll actually share that during my session, my first session, that was revealed, that I'm a teacher in the place between here and now, and I actually teach and I prepare people to come here to Earth. So I would be like, that's usually what I do. I'm not typically on life assignments. And so that is very common. I didn't particularly ask that with her, but again, I time dated it. It seemed like it was around the late 1950s, from the little girl age to mid 1960s, through those fact-finding questions.
Okay. So probably not back to back. Okay, so we could maybe deduce that fact. Okay, so that sort of sorted. My other question is related to that. I wonder if the life that she was living now, where she had a good family, was chosen in direct opposition of what she experienced then, which I think could be interesting to unpack. But maybe we don't know that.
We don't know that because, the soul can choose. And so there's been many times when my clients regress and we go through that experience where they are picking the lifetime. They are picking their parents. I've had clients pick the color of their soul, and all of a sudden they get sucked into the womb, and then we're in the womb of the mom, and I'm like, where are we? And so there's so many things that come through. Well, anything can happen in a session. Really, the possibilities are just so endless, Krista. It's really fascinating work.
Yeah, and I mean, it is so fascinating. It's so interesting to me. I lost two family members pretty close to one another, and that pushed me into a depression in my mid-30s, where I started to deep dive into death and read just all of the things about, what happens when you die, how do we stay connected to our loved ones, and as I started, you just go down rabbit holes, and so you start picking up all the things, right? And so it was so fascinating in that deep dive to hear stories like this of people who, and even that they have found their past life. Like there are people who have literally found the people. They, not that they're here, but they can identify them factually in history. It's just amazing, and it's so interesting that we have that ability and that we we don't tap into it as much. Or I think in our current society, there's just a lot of fear of the unknown and the mysticism of it. So a lot of people sort of turn away from that, but that's okay. My next question was, so we're going in these past life regressions, we're releasing some trauma, we're living in our current lives. One of the things that you said that you also help people do is be able to align their purpose through this work that you do. When you're doing these regressions, how much of that is a factor, or is it after the healing happens or in parallel? Walk us through that.
Yeah. So I think it's important to highlight the timeline of a session, like everything that happens. And I would like to preface that this work, the quantum healing hypnosis, it is, for me anyways, it is the deepest, most profound inner work that I've come across, which is why I've dedicated my life to it. So when you come for a session, again, I'm going to say it, I said it earlier, you need to be open and ready. And you need to trust yourself. I mean, ultimately, it's yourself, your higher self that's coming through and coming forward. So you have
and a lot of us are afraid of ourselves.
I know, and it's interesting. And if you are, I'm going to find out real fast in the session, because your higher self isn't going to come through, and you're going to be like, I don't know. That's telling me that you're not aligned with the belief system, and that's going to be unfortunate. It happens not often, but it does happen sometimes that we find out that they're having a hard time trusting themselves, and again, that goes to programming and society. Your higher self isn't going to lie to you or take you anywhere or show you anything that is scary or that you aren't ready to know or to heal from. It has your best interest at stake at all times. So when somebody comes to me for a session, again, we begin the session with spiritual counseling by chatting. Try to chat for at least 2 hours. It's really important. That is probably the most important part of this session. And I know that if you start crying and opening up to me in the pre-session, you're going to have a very deep experience, and a lot of trauma is going to be healed. It's going to be an incredible session. Sometimes people come and they're closed off, and you can tell by their body language, and we don't quite get as much out of it as a practitioner as I would like to see, but they walk away getting what they needed at that time and place. So after we chat and we go through, the spiritual counseling, then we start the regression, and that's where we do regress into the past life. I will also say, Krista, sometimes it's not a past life. Sometimes people go to lifetimes on other planets. It's very common. That's been happening and coming through a lot lately. I've regressed several people to the red planet, which seems like a futuristic version of Mars. Very interesting. My clients will all tell me the exact same stuff under hypnosis. So definitely, I do believe that this is a true place. The logical mind of me, even as a practitioner, I do try to debunk this stuff myself. But
why? Sorry to just sidebar real quick before we go back into the other stuff. But why do you think there's been an uptick in that? I think in general we've been feeling that. Is it because we're making different decisions now that are changing the future, essentially?
I would say it's because of the shift. It's
the consciousness shift.
Yeah, Dolores talked about it 30 years ago. For anyone listening, Dolores Cannon was talking about the shift in consciousness 30 years ago. And so I would say that as we're expanding and moving from that mind-based 3D matrix type of thinking into more of a heart-based and a heart-centered way of thinking, our vibration is increasing, and we're becoming more aware as our consciousness expands. And therefore more stuff is starting to come through because we are ready for it. A lot of clients are also being activated in sessions, and we'll touch on that later. But sometimes it's a past life, sometimes it's life on another planet, and once in a while we'll even regress into an earlier phase in this lifetime, because that's where the trauma is, and that's what needs to be released. I had a client recently who regressed to age 7, where this kid bully Billy had depantsed her on the play yard, and after the regression, she says, I haven't thought about, she called him Billy the bully, Billy the bully in 30 years, but that was there in her mind, and it was affecting her now. And her higher self said, no, we're going to release this shit. And so we experienced Billy the bully, and that it was a lot of crying and stuff, and cord cutting that came through. So yes, we will regress And then after the regression and after the death experience, I like to hang out on the other side and see what comes through. That's where the real interesting stuff happens, right? So, after we go through that death scene, if it's a previous life or another planet, I like to see what comes forward. Sometimes our soul family will come and greet us. It's very, very common that ancestors or loved ones who have passed will come through with beautiful messages. Pets come through all the time. Pets. Have you ever lost a pet or something? Sometimes they will come through. It's pretty common.
I love that.
Clients will also say, oh, they're here to take me home, and a spaceship will come, and they get on the spaceship, and then all of a sudden we are going somewhere. I'm like, where are we going? So real interesting stuff. It's the most incredible place to explore. For my session, that's where I connected with the elders. There's the elders, the watchers, they're also referred to, will come through often, or the council, they are called. I connected to the council, and that's when they came through and said that I was a teacher and that I normally, am teaching people to prepare. So that space is very interesting. After we do the between life exploration, that's when I will call the higher self, subconscious, to come through more clearly and be more present in the body. It is a part that's inside each and every one of us. We also call it the intuition. And I say it's okay to speak. You can use the voice box. When it comes through, it's interesting. Sometimes it has an accent, or it's sometimes it can be like very robotic and monotone. It's really interesting. But I always know as a practitioner, I'm trained to know when I really have the highest self that I'm speaking to. And then that's when I say, will you scan their body for me? Let's look for any trauma, any emotions, any health concerns. What are you finding? And we will find all sorts of things. And I would like to say that certain aches and pains in the body are linked to emotions. So for instance, if my client is experiencing pain in the knees, so many subconscious minds have told me that is because they're not moving forward. There's something that's holding them back and they're not moving forward, and so it's manifesting as pain in the knees or in the feet. Sadness will stay in the heart. If you have like something that had happened from the past life or past experience, it'll manifest as sadness in the heart. And fear comes up very frequently, and it likes to live in the mind. And headaches. So if you're having like headaches or even if you can't sleep, it's fear that is trapped in the mind. So we will clear all of that. And then the final part of the session is probably, outside of the between life exploration, is probably my favorite part. And that's when I go through the list of questions that you've brought to me. My clients will bring the list of questions that they want to ask their higher self, and we get those answers to all of the most important life questions that you want to know. The number one question on the list is, what is my life's purpose? And your higher self will tell you, and it will answer that for you. It'll tell you anything that you want to know that serves your highest good. The only question I would never ask, and it probably wouldn't even tell you anyways, is when will I die? I had one person bring me that, and I said, I'm not asking that. Not going to help you. It's just not. And
we're all gonna die, so
yeah, I mean, and sometimes the higher self doesn't want to disclose something, and it'll say it's not time yet, or irrelevant is a very common response. Irrelevant, so robotic. Irrelevant, or she doesn't need to know that, or it'll say no sometimes if it doesn't serve your highest interest to know.
Yeah, and I guess we should clarify too to the listening audience and viewing audience. Now you're doing this in person and virtually, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So before you go on, can you sort of discuss the difference between doing it virtually and in person, and any sort of fear somebody might feel doing it from a distance perspective?
Yeah. And that's actually where I was going to go. So
okay, good.
Even as a practitioner, I have my reservations about doing the work online. I will say that. But I started to lean into it more, and I'm like, no, because if people feel like they align with me, there's a reason for that. If they have reached out to me and have chosen me to be the practitioner, it's because they're being guided to me, and I want to help them in the space that they're ready to receive the help. So I did decide to receive my online certifications. And even to my surprise as a practitioner, I'm going to tell you, Krista, that some of my best, most amazing sessions actually happen online. And I would say that that's because everybody feels different and different, comfortable in different environments.
Hmm.
Sometimes the clients feel more comfortable and they can relax more in their own home and their own, in their bed in that space. A lot of people prefer to come in person for a session, so I can accommodate either.
Okay, so I wanted to ask in terms of bringing it back to the whole um, regression process that happens. So when you're doing it distance or even in person, how are you bringing people back into their body and into that present moment? And is it in any way like uncomfortable to have that happen?
No, it's definitely not uncomfortable. And then I will say this, Krista, that hypnosis, I'd like to debunk that real quick, because society and Hollywood has done a really good job at making hypnosis seem so scary. But it's very natural. Every single person is actually in hypnosis twice a day. Well, not hypnosis, but the same state of mind, which is the theta brainwave state. When we are waking up, it's that dream-like state, where you're kind of starting to know, like, hey, I'm waking up, and you're recalling the dreams, kind of. And then at night, when you're falling asleep, you're also in the theta state once again, as you're starting to drift off, and maybe some thoughts or images start to pop in your mind. So it's a very natural state to be in. It's nothing scary. You always are slightly aware, like, hey, I'm doing hypnosis. Very similar to like when you're meditating, you're meditating. So bringing somebody back is not scary, coming back in, but it is a gradual process, and it's very important that it's done in a specific way with quantum healing, because again, we're actually connecting to the deepest part of our subconscious mind. And if you don't mind, I would actually like to explain why quantum is used in this term, and that is because
Yeah.
Dolores Cannon actually discovered a very unique technique where we are able to connect with the part of us that lives beyond this dimension and beyond this realm. And as a practitioner, again, sometimes I try to debunk stuff. It's that analytical part inside of me. But it is true connection beyond this three-dimensional realm. If I try to ask your higher self a time-based question, it does not understand, because I am speaking to the part that is inside of you that is in the fifth dimension or seventh
It's
dimension, whatever
timeless.
dimension. Yeah, it's timeless. And I have actually come to discover, it is my belief that, time really doesn't exist. I don't think that that's, a new concept, but everything is happening all at once, simultaneously. We are living in the past, present, future, different dimensions all at once. Everything is happening. And so when I'm tapping into that part inside of you, that's how you're communicating and relaying to me. If I ask a time-based question, it just can't quantify it. It does not understand. And
It's like,
so,
dude, this does not compute.
yeah, and it'll say, like, I don't understand. Like, it will actually say that to me. So when we are bringing the person back, to answer your question, Krista, it's really important that we bring back to this daytime lifetime, and that's actually part of the process of bringing the person back. It's done in a very specific manner to ensure that all parts of you are brought back. I've never had any complications or issues, and I don't know any practitioners that have. It's done in a very specific way.
Hmm. Yeah, I wanted to just lay that out there for anyone who,
Mm-hmm.
again, may have not come face to face with this work and may have questions about it or be a little bit nervous. And you're right, society has conditioned us through movies and cinema that, or like, I think when you see people do hypnosis and you do funny things, like people
Yeah.
don't want to do that because they'll feel embarrassed. So we're getting towards the end here, and I just have one more question I want to ask you, and then we'll wrap up. I was wondering if you could take maybe one to three things, whatever you sort of find in your consciousness at this moment, that you've learned through either your own regression or other people's regression that has been really profound in shifting the way you live your life today.
Yeah. Number one is trust. Um, and that might sound cliche, like, but it's the truth. Like, we need to lean into trusting our intuition more. Because that is our partner in this world. It is the higher self. It's one and the same. If you have an urge to do something, or something pops into your mind, you need to listen to that. And I will say I'm a little tired of hearing people's subconscious say, like, they don't listen to me. I keep sending them messages and they're ignoring me. Like, your higher self is telling me that all the time in sessions, people. So listen, trust any little pings or vibes or feelings. And that's going to expand your intuition and help you
Mm.
become a more intuitive being the more that you listen to that. Number two, I would say don't fear death. I don't fear it anymore. Again, I've come to find it as a very serene experience. It's very peaceful, and it's nothing to be feared or be afraid of. So, and then the third thing that I would say is don't be afraid. Fear. Again, fear likes to live in the mind, and there's a lot of fear-based programming out there. We'll dive super deep into that, but be more conscious, be more aware of the images, the messages you're receiving, and where you're getting information from, because there's a lot going on right now. There is a struggle between the light and the dark. And a lot of it's coming through and it's seeping in through music and through images and things. So be very mindful and don't live in fear, because fear is the one thing, and Dolores talked about this, fear is the one thing that will hold you back from raising your vibration and from ascending and from living your life's purpose.
Yeah, I love the idea of letting go of the fear because I grew up in a very indoctrinated cultic Catholic experience, which I've talked a lot about on the podcast, so I again won't get into it. But all of it was fear-based, and it was also very much in the vein of patriarchy, control, just the masculine, all the things,
Yeah.
just this pressurizing of and suppression and submission. And then that got filtered into like all other parts of your life, like fearing certain people, fearing certain experiences. And it's so interesting coming out of that experience and leaning more in towards love. And I don't mean that just in a cheesy way, but leaning more into loving and trusting myself, loving and trusting the world, loving and trusting our experiences, that it changes everything to move out of that fear-based thinking. It's life-changing, literally.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'd like to open up. I know we're wrapping up here, but
Mm-hmm.
that really hits home for me. And I'm still, if I'm going to be open and honest, I'm still processing fear from my childhood. My mom again was schizophrenic. She thought people were following us and chasing us, and if I didn't buy into that and play along with the delusion, then she thought I was trying to kill her. And so there was a lot of fear that was instilled in me of as a young child, lots of fear based, and it's taken me a long time to try to work through that and overcome that, and I'm still working at it. But I'm also able to recognize it now more in society. It's everywhere. Like, there's so much
Mm.
fear mongering and fear based stuff happening. So we really have to trust our instincts and just be more conscious and aware. And it's a process. Letting go of the fear that's been, ingrained in our body and it is residing. It does not happen overnight. I'm still processing stuff, a lot of stuff.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I love that you said that because I really always share that with people that this healing process,
Hmm.
it's over time, it's incremental, just like the fear indoctrination was
Yeah.
incremental. It's like little by little, and every time it's the same process. Every time we experience healing incrementally, it
Hmm.
gets easier on the other side, and same thing with fear. So I love that you said that. Well, we're getting to the end here, so where can everyone um, catch you online, your
Yeah.
websites, what programs do you have? How can people connect with you? Where do you hang out?
Thanks so much for asking. If anybody's feeling guided to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. I hang out there, and my handles are I am Jennifer Mtichell. So it's just my name. On my website, if you want to learn more about quantum healing, I have a lot of information online. I really try to answer all questions you might have. And my website is The Soul Experiences, and that's plural. So thesoulexperiences.com. Whether or not you book a session with me, I'm here to answer any questions that you have. I'm always here to support anyone on their healing path or healing journey. I'm just wanting to spread this work because it's so amazing and powerful.
Yeah, beautiful. And I always like to end in gratitude. So I always like to check in with my
Mm-hmm.
guests and ask them what three things they're grateful for in this moment, this year, this second, this week, whatever is in your heart space today?
I just love that question because gratitude will change everything in life. And it truly does. So and it's important to ask yourself that question every single day. And I write mine down actually. So just in life, I'm thankful for, there's so much to be thankful for. First, I'm thankful for this opportunity. So thank you so much for letting me come on and share on your show today. So I'm thankful for that. Every day is a gift. So I am thankful for today that I woke up and that, I'm here, and I'm thankful for my beautiful family.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I had a really great time with you, and thank you for hanging out with me for an hour and sharing your work with you and explaining all of the granular details around the work that you do, which is really interesting and important, and just another outlet for people to heal and integrate and awaken, which is all of the things I'm a huge proponent for, so that we can truly elevate the consciousness of this earth and switch from that fear-based to love-based living. So thank you so much for contributing to the collective in such a beautiful way.
Oh, thank you. It was so lovely being on the show today.
This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Xiomara, in alignment with LightCasting. Music curated and created by Mr. Pixie. You can find I'm Awake Now What on all social media channels by searching IANW Podcast. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, download, rate, and review. Come back every Sunday to partake in a new and enlightening conversation. May you be filled with love and light until we meet again.